All right, welcome to another episode of Warrior versus Zombie. And man, I can't be more excited to introduce today's warrior guest to you, Frank King. And I will in a second, but first let me remind you of why you're here if you forgot or if you haven't joined us before. Success is a journey, it's not a destination. As warriors, we all have a history of ups and downs, wins and losses that are all part of making us who we are up to this point and provide a foundation for our path forward. We all battle our inner zombie as well as those zombies in our world. And in each episode, I interview warriors who are aspiring leaders from all walks of life, entrepreneurs, artists, health practitioners, business owners, literally any inspired leader that has a story to tell. These warriors have a cause, they have a unique value, and a vision that goes generations into the future. And today's guest is absolutely no exception. Frank King is an awesome warrior. He's a suicide prevention speaker and trainer. Was a writer on The Tonight Show for 20 years. He's a stand-up comedian and TED coach now for last 7 years. Zombie of a lifetime battle is one of the biggest things that he's experienced of major depressive disorder and chronic suicidality, which I am sure we'll hear about. He turned his long, dark journey, as he calls it. We call it a journey too. He labels as long and dark into 6 TEDx Talks, which is kind of cool because I have yet to get on a TEDx stage, sharing his life-saving insights on mental health awareness with associations, corporations, and colleges. Now Frank is a motivational public speaker who uses his life lessons of coming out, as it were, standing in his truth and doing it with humor to start the conversation. I've already experienced that, and we're going to have fun here. Giving people permission to express their feelings and experiences surrounding depression and suicide. And he believes that where there is humor, there is hope. Where there is laughter, there is life, and nobody dies laughing. The right person at the right time with the right information can save a life, and we are totally aligned there. Frank King, welcome to Warrior versus Zombie. How are you today? And Eugene, I guess, is where you're at today.
I am busier than a hooker at a four-way stop.
So, is it what's the weather like in that part of the world right now? We're is it raining? Is it
No, it's beautiful and it's going to be 80.
wow? Actually, it's going to be warmer. I'm in Dallas. It's going to be warmer there today by about 10 degrees than it's supposed to be here. We're about 10 degrees below our normal. So,
Well,
um,
and it's too bad we didn't meet earlier, David, because I've been to Plano twice in the last 2 months.
have you?
Yes,
Wow. What brought you to Plano?
plea bargain. No, I did a, I did a conference at the Plano Frisco Marriott and the Plano Frisco some other hotel. I can't remember which one it was. One was a speaker summit. One was actually I spoke for an association, a big energy association, that the occupation with the highest rate of suicide is mining, excavation, drilling, followed by construction.
Wow.
Yeah, so they had a conference, and they finally tumbled to the fact that they've got a problem, and so that's my lane. I speak on suicide prevention as a workplace health and safety issue. So,
Well, I'm sure we're going to get into a whole lot of stuff, and I absolutely want to make sure we have time to hear your story. I'm still fascinated by the little bits that I've already heard, and I want to, have you share your story of how you got from where you started to where you are today. So let's take a quick break. We'll hear a little bit of Ricky Jean Wright on our theme song, It's Not the Getting There, for the audio audience, and we'll be right back with Frank King and Warrior versus Zombie. All right, we are back. And Frank, great check in. Excited to have you here. Jealous that you're a little warmer there, although 70 degrees or 80 degrees, still in the range of, I like this weather. So, and we're not dealing with any severe weather here, which is many times the case here in Dallas. So let's, as I said before we took the break, share with me your story, and you can pick where you want to start, but tell me how you got started, and then getting to today. I gave an overview for the audience, kind of your credentials or your journey a little bit, but I know there's a whole lot more to tell.
Well, David, it started in the fourth grade. I told my first joke. The other students were laughing. The teacher was hysterical. She was laughing so hard she had to excuse herself and go to the teacher's lounge. And I realized and thought to myself at that moment, I'm going to be a stand-up comedian. And in 12th grade, having taken 3 years of drama and never gotten a good part, I was always in the chorus in the school play. I thought, you know what? If I do stand-up comedy, I can write, produce, direct, and star in my own little show every night. So I did the senior talent show, and nobody had ever done stand-up before, and I won. And I went home and I said to my mama, I'm going to be a stand-up comedian. And she said, son, you're going to college first. I don't care what you do when you get done. You can be a goat herder for all I care, but you're going to be a goat herder with a college degree. So I went to UNC Chapel Hill, got a couple of college degrees, moved to the West Coast with my high school sweetheart, and who became my first wife, San Diego. There just happens to be a branch of the Comedy Store, the world famous Comedy Store, the one on Sunset in LA, in San Diego. And I got up on stage for my first 5 minutes, an open mic night, and inside my head, I heard a voice, you're home. And my second thought was, I'm going to do this for a living, even though I have no idea. I thought about doing a keynote called, what could you do if you didn't know no better? Because if I'd known how hard it was to make a living doing stand-up comedy, I might not have tried. Although there's another story there about how I got into comedy, and I really didn't have any choice. But I'll share that with you later if you like. Okay. But a year later, after my first open mic night, I said to my girlfriend, now my wife for 35 years, I'm going on the road to be a stand-up comedian professionally. Do you want to just come along for the ride? Figuring she'd go, oh, heck no. She goes, yeah. So we gave up our jobs, gave up the apartment, hopped in the car, and we were on the road without a home for 2,629 nights in a row, 7 years and change. Comedy club to comedy club to comedy club. And worked with Ellen and Rosie and Seinfeld and Dennis Miller and Adam Sandler and Kevin James and Foxworthy, and opened for Lou Rawls, the Beach Boys, Mary Wilson, Randy Travis. An amazing 7 years and change. It was 85 to about 94. So I guess about 9 years total. And then I got a job in radio. Lasted 18 months. I was a co-host on the #1 morning show in Raleigh, North Carolina, my old hometown. And I took that show in 18 months and drove it to #6. And a friend of mine said, you didn't just drive it in the ground, you drove that thing into Middle Earth. And so when I got fired, because there are two kinds of people in radio, David, people who've been fired, people who are going to be fired. The comedy club boomed, busted, but my comedy was very clean. So I could make the shift to corporate comedy after dinner, after lunch, the rubber chicken circuit, which I did until 2007, 8. And then in that last recession, 2007, 8, 9, 10, speaking business dropped off 80%, practically overnight. And my wife and I lost everything we had worked for in 25 years in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And that's when I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like. Went to the barn and put it in my mouth, pulled the hammer back to see if I could do it. Spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger. A friend of mine heard me keynote recently, and he thought it'd be funny. He came up afterwards. He goes, hey, man, how come you didn't pull the trigger? I go, hey, man, because you try to sound slightly less disappointed. The reason I didn't pull the trigger is because, well, it's in my first TEDx talk, as is my mental health history. I live with major depressive disorder and chronic suicidal ideation, and it runs in my family. It's called generational depression and suicide. My grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. My great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I screamed for days. And obviously I came very close to ending my life. So when the recession was over and the meeting business came back, the meeting planner said to me, Frank, we love you. We just can't pay you that kind of money anymore just to be funny. You have to teach the audience something. Great. I had no idea. But a friend of mine named Judy Carter, a speaker and comedian, magician, had written a book called The Message of You, Turning Your Life into a Money-Making Speaking Career. And she gave me a copy. And I went into it thinking I got nothing to teach anybody. And about halfway through, I thought, oh my God, I do. I could tell my mental health story. And if I got some suicide prevention training, got certified, I could make that my learning objectives, my takeaways, my able tos, how tos. So that's what I did. The other hurdle, David, was to rebrand. All the meeting planners, speakers bureaus thought of me as a funny guy because I've been doing stand-up 2.5 decades. Mm-hmm. So I thought I'll do a TEDx. So I got my first TEDx. I did it on suicide prevention. And as with a lot of people who have mental illness, I kept that to myself. Nobody knew that I had depression and thoughts of suicide, not my family, my friends, my wife, nobody. And I actually came out on stage. I revealed to the world on stage in that TEDx that I lived with depression and thoughts of suicide. And I discovered that even though one person dies by suicide every 9 minutes in the US, hardly anybody talks about it unless you bring it up. And almost everybody has a story then. And so my tagline is start the conversation, break the silence, break the stigma. And so that's what I've been doing. And my clients will tell you, we just brought them in here, start the conversation, because what happens is, especially if a guy gets up on stage and reveals he's nuttier than a squirrel turd, that he's vulnerable, it gives other people permission to give voice to their feelings and experiences without recrimination. I do a general Q&A at the end. And then I say to the audience, look, if you got a question you don't want to ask in front of everybody, like, hey, I'm crazy, can you help me? I'll hang out and spend, about 30 minutes and answer questions individually. And most of my conversations at that point start like this. Frank, I've never told anybody this. Well, I get that a lot because they feel, a friend of mine who's in the mental health business says he feels like the permission fairy. You have a wand, ding, and it gives them permission. It's like they've been waiting for the magic words to be spoken out loud.
Yeah.
And so that's what I've been doing. TED Talk was 2014, and I've been speaking on suicide prevention. And I was doing other speeches at the time. 2018, actually 2017, late in the year, I'm on a ship because I did cruise comedy about 10 years, thinking about the people in my community who were super successful, people I knew in the Chamber of Commerce, trying to figure out what they all had in common. And it hit me. They all have one thing in common, and that is they do only one thing, and they do it extremely well. That's what they're known for. They're experts, thought leaders. So January 1st, 2018, I thought, that's it. If somebody wants me to do one of my other keynotes, fine, but I'm not going to market that. I'm just going to become the mental health comedian. A friend of mine gave me that. I was trying to figure out what I was going to call myself, what my URL was going to be. He goes, I had an idea. You're the mental health comedian. Oh my God. I went to GoDaddy, bought the .com, and that's my brand. I am the mental, and people say to me, does being a comedian keep you from getting gigs speaking on suicide prevention? And I go, no, you got it backwards. They want the story, lived experience. They want the learning, objectives. And the fact that I can leaven it with some organic, tasteful humor makes it irresistible. I mean, who would you rather hear it from? I've got a 1 to 3 hour suicide prevention continuing education program for doctors, dentists, physicians. I mean, who would you rather hear that from? A clinician for 3 hours or a comedian for 3 hours? So that's how I got to where I am today. And by the way, major depressive, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is, whenever I hear today, I kind of think we're coming to the present. But I do want to explore, and this is, maybe it's me, it's kind of a personal thing, but when it comes to your journey of doing talks, and you mentioned you do on a cruise. I love cruising. I'm going to be cruising the Mediterranean for after my son's wedding in July out of Rome, and I always said I wanted to be a missionary to a cruise ship because I thought that would be a great gig, right? You stay on the cruise ship, you do all this stuff, and you have to do something. Tell me about that. How did that happen? Is it kind of the same context as a corporate speaker, or how did that happen? I'm curious about that.
Well, before we go there,
okay,
which cruise line are you going to be going
on? Norwegian.
Okay. Most of my work is done in Holland, America.
Okay.
And you do know Rome doesn't have a port. They have to park somewhere else and you have to ride in a bus.
Yeah,
I just want
ride
you
in
to
a
know that
boat, right?
don't want you to be disappointed.
Right.
And I was very popular with the older guests for some reason, I guess because I'm older. And so I got to do a lot of the longer, nicer itineraries, including the world cruise. I would do 10 days in the middle of a world cruise. And I don't know if you know this or not, but the longer the cruise, the older the passenger.
Mm-hmm.
In the
Makes
world
sense.
cruise, it's old people and their parents. And every night, same thing for dessert, oxygen. I heard it once, heard half a dozen times. Clear, boom. What
Sorry,
happened
I had to
was,
laugh.
you should laugh. That's in my routine.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I was doing a world cruise, and I bring the lights in the audience halfway up. Always, I bill it in the the daily program as comedy and conversation. I tell the audience, look, if you have a question, just raise your hand, and I'll call on you. If you didn't understand a joke, raise your hand. And so I told a joke about funeral directors. I did a big funeral directors association, and every industry has a favorite joke. And the funeral director's favorite joke is this: what's the most difficult thing about being a mortician? It's trying to look sad at a $35,000 funeral. So I asked the audience, anybody here in the audience, a mortician, active duty or retired? And a guy in the balcony raised his hand. And I go, what is your name, sir? He said, Musgrove. I said, Musgrove? He goes, yeah. I go, Mr. Musgrove, there are 6 or 7 Musgrove mortuaries in the town I live in, Eugene. He goes, those are mine. And I said, well, Mr. Musgrove, what's a mortician doing on a 115-day world cruise? He stands up and he goes like this: inventory? My God. So the way I got into cruising was this. I'm a big networker. My mom was a networker. I learned it at her knee. I didn't realize I was learning it. The idea that you give value first without expectation of return. I learned that from her. I thought everybody knew that until I saw my first book on it. I'm like, people don't get this. But I had helped a young woman who was doing comedy clubs to make the move to corporate comedy, because comedy clubs, tough living life, but for a woman, even more so, because it's like living in a frat house. And so I helped to get into the corporate market. And so one summer, I can't remember why, but business had dropped off a bit. And I said to her on the phone, we're chatting, I'm going to have to go back to selling insurance. And she goes, you are not. She goes, I've got a cruise agent. They have a showcase next Friday. I know for a fact somebody's dropped out. I can call her and have her ask her, can you come and showcase? And if you'll fly yourself to Atlanta and back, put yourself up, you can do it. So I did. And I did the showcase. And that's how I got into the cruise business. What they do is they invite the cruise talent coordinators to the showcase from Holland America, Carnival, Princess. And I ended up getting a few weeks work, and then a few more, and then a few more. And so because I was speaking, I would only do it in the slow times, like summertime when nobody conferences, or Thanksgiving or Christmas or New Year's, when a lot of the acts who have children or family, they want to be home for the holidays. So that's an easy one to get. So, and I did that for 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah, until famously, February of 2020. Yeah. If you type the words Frank King comedian and quarantine into your Google search, you will find an amazing array. I think the first article is from Time, the second one's from Newsweek, because I came back from that area to the US, by the way, cleared by the CDC on both ends to re-enter the country. Mm-hmm. But the way I made the mistake of speaking to the press, and they portrayed it as comedian jumps quarantine, sneaks back into the US. Now, David, I wish I had that skill set. I wish I could actually sneak out of Cambodia and actually sneak into the US, because, I'd be Jason Bourne. But I never got, nobody on our ship ever got sick. There was a Diamond Princess nearby. We both sailed from Singapore on the same day. We didn't let anybody on the ship who'd been in mainland China in the last 2 weeks. They let anybody on who wanted to get on. And they were in quarantine, parked off Japan for weeks. But people conflated the two ships. So people thought that I came back to the US dragging the virus. A guy called me up. We had to change our home phone number. A guy called me up and goes, "You came back to this county to kill everybody." I go, "No, I've got a list and you just made the VIP section." So, but it's as a comedian, it's a great gig, or they call it guest entertainer.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, the same thing would be true of a minister on the ship.
Right.
Many of the ships have a minister or a person of a clergy.
Mm-hmm.
And the deal is they pay to get you there, they pay to get you home, and you get the cruise for free, and you can bring a friend. So a lot of doctors, nurses, clergymen, clergy women take those cruises, and they trade their time as a faith representative for the cruise. So
Mm-hmm.
it is something you can do, not get paid, but you don't have to pay for the cruise either. So it's a great way to see the world.
Yep. So, well, let's do this. We can talk about more in what you're doing today, because I know that's where your current passion is and your vision forward. So let's take another quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll hear about why you're doing what you're doing today, which I've already heard a little bit of that in your story, and what kind of value. I already know your humor and other things, but kind of share that, and then what kind of impact are you hoping to have going forward, and then
Okay.
we'll take a final break, and then we'll be back. So with that, let's take a quick break, hear a little more of Ricky Jean Wright, and we'll be back with Frank King and Warrior versus Zombie. All right, we are back, and Frank, thanks for the story, and thanks for the tips on how to get on a cruise line. Like I said, I know maybe not everybody listening would be that interested, but I'm always fascinated by how you get the gig of being on a cruise, because I like that kind of relaxing environment. So yeah, it's just a great way to kick back and see some stuff, and just once I learned that you don't have to do everything on the itinerary, it's a very relaxing kind of thing. My first cruise, I was exhausted by the end, because I tried to eat at every meal, and I tried to see every show, and I tried to go on every excursion. And by the time I was done, I needed another vacation. So, but anyway, so that was kind of fascinating. So tell me, why are you doing, what you're doing today with the TEDx Talks and whatever else you're doing. Curious as if you're doing any more stand-up comedy. That's an interesting thing. I think we might have talked about that. But and what kind of impact are you hoping to have as we go forward?
Well, funny you should ask about stand-up comedy. The last national show I did was Bananas, appealing comedy for the entire family, in 2003. And I've applied 5 times. I applied 5 times to get on something called Dry Bar Comedy. It's a YouTube comedy series. It's been around about 4 years. It's a clean comedy series. And I finally got it. April 29th of 2022, I'll be doing. So if you're listening to this afterwards, it's already happened. But I'll be in Salt Lake City at the comedy club there, and I'll be doing my episode of Dry Bar Comedy. And when I was in Plano the first time this year, I said to the meeting planner, "Do you have a banquet?" Because I was doing a keynote. And he goes, "Yeah." I go, "Do you have any entertainment?" And he goes, "No." I said, "Do you want 45 minutes of stand up?" So what I do is I offer the stand up as a added value, or if they need an auctioneer. One, make two, bid it on that two, make two, bid it on that two. Yo tengo 20, 30, 30, 30 donde, 30 donde, ¿quién más, quién más? I can do it in Spanish, English, or Spanglish. And so it's just an add-on. It makes the meeting planner happier for what they're paying me. Because I sell myself by the day. I go, look, I'll do a keynote in the morning. I'll do a breakout in the afternoon. I'll acid wash the pool at the hotel. It's a personal services contract. I'll do whatever you ask. Well, up to a point. Yeah, so and people ask me, how'd you pick suicide as a topic? Well, you now know, David, I didn't pick it. It picked me.
Right.
It's a club nobody wants to join. But and I believe that my depression and thoughts of suicide are simply the flip side of my comedic ability, imagination, and creativity. I believe I was made this way. This is not a mistake. And the trick is to treat the mental disability, and then wrap your arms around, embrace, and energize the mental ability. That's why I did the TED Talk called Mental with Benefits. I kept bumping into people who are mentally ill who had some of their amazing ability, actors, writers, comedians. And I thought, it can't be a coincidence. And sure enough, there's a laundry list of people with a wide variety of mental illnesses who are super talented in some other area. Mm-hmm. I said that one time at a conference, and a young man came up. He said, my son Mason is on the spectrum. He's 8 years old. I said, well, does he have any special abilities? He goes, man, he's an amazing athlete. I said, for example? He goes, well, we bought a swim club membership, and Mason taught himself to swim the Australian crawl, and breathe on both sides in 2 weeks. I taught myself how to swim the crawl and breathe on both sides. As an adult, it took me a month every day. And I said, how about on land? He goes, oh man, he's lightning fast. He goes, Frank, we're at the Special Olympics, and they're all lined up for the 100-yard dash, including Mason. And the gun goes off, and all the other kids take off, and Mason's standing there because nobody bothered to tell Mason what the gun was about. So he said, I felt like I was in that Forrest Gump movie. Run, Mason, run. So Mason goes, oh, run. He made up the 20-yard difference that the other kids had on him and won the 100-yard dash. I go, well, you need to wrap your arms around that. Whatever he likes playing, you need to. And I think that's how the education system should be. The IEP, the individual education plan, should truly be individual. If a kid's got OCD, steer them in the direction of an industry, a career that values that: architecture, banking, finance, things where they pay for people who are detail oriented. Or if they've got dyslexia, forget the STEM programs, science, technology, whatever. That's just all numbers and letters rolling around on the page. And anyway, that was the point of the talk, was that if you can convince a child that yes, you have a disability, but here's something they don't tell you: you have some abilities your peers can't touch. It would change the frame, which could reduce stigma and bullying and eventually child suicide. So, and that's my goal. My stated goal is to save at least one life a day.
Amen.
And because I have chronic suicidal ideation, and I tell the audience what that means. That means that people like me, suicide's an option on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. And when I say small, my car broke down a couple of years ago, and I had 3 thoughts: get it fixed, buy a new one, or just kill myself, which sounds absurd, usually gets a laugh. And I say to them, look, the benefit of saying that out loud is every time I've spoken since 2014, there's been at least one person in the audience who has that. They don't know it has a name. They think they're just some kind of freak and completely alone. Young woman came up after a college presentation. Thanks for your keynote. Said, you're welcome. She goes, but it made me weep. How did it make you weep? She goes, you know the story about your car, get it fixed, buy new and kill yourself. I've been having those thoughts all my life. I thought it was just me, that I'm some kind of freak and completely alone. And when I heard you say that out loud, I realized for the first time in my life that I'm not in fact alone, and I wept. I think I told you when we were chatting last night, I feel like George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. I've been shown what these people's lives might be like if I weren't there simply to reassure them that it's a thing and they're not alone. And if I killed myself, theoretically, I would take a lot of those people with me because they never had a chance to hear me say that. So that's my why. That's the ROI for me, is that, and very therapeutic, by the way, for me, with my struggles with mental challenges, and the fact you're helping people.
Well, that's, man, you've got it all wrapped into one. I love it because, getting your message out, having people understand and give them permission to embrace the challenge that they've got in front of them, but realize also the other part that's just so brilliant and so inspiring to me is we all have limitations. We might not have a good label for them. We might not realize it, but the other thing is we all have unique value. Yours, I can see in your humor, in your way of processing things, your quick wit, your attitude, in spite of, suicide always being on the table. The reality of it is you have amazing skills, and so do a lot of everybody else. It's just we always try to convince people to focus on their limitation or their challenge and not
Yep.
on the fact that there's so much more potential. I don't care if you're on the spectrum or you have ADD like me that I didn't even realize, and I had to figure out how to go, and I thought I just couldn't ever concentrate, and it stressed me out, gave me anxiety, depression, all the things that you're maybe not exactly the label you have, but those kinds of things. And I have, children, other people, in my immediate sphere. So I love the fact that you want to save one life a day, and I'm sure you are. And frankly, I'm excited to get this podcast out there so other people can hear that you exist. Well, let's do this. I want to take one more quick break, and then I'm going to come back, and I think you've given us a whole lot to chew on here, but I want to hear when we come back, what one or two or whatever things do you want to make sure we don't miss in this conversation? And then how do we stay in touch with you going forward? So let's take a quick break. We'll hear a little more Ricky Jean Wright, and we'll be right back with Frank King and Warrior versus Zombie. All right, brother. It's been an amazing journey, and it never is long enough. I don't even know how long it goes because I just kind of go with my feel here, and just there's so much more. I think being an entertainer, that you always leave the audience wanting more. So I am certain that the audience listening to this podcast is going to go, I got to hear more of this guy. So we may come back. We may drill down on the whole suicide prevention, or I know you've done a mastermind, but we talked about TEDx Talks, but anyway, so tell me a little bit. I know you know how to get people on the stage. We didn't talk that much about that on TEDx, which again I think is something that you monetize and add value.
Yeah.
But beyond that, what is it? What do you want to make sure that we take away from this discussion or this podcast?
Well, and here's how we set up our next episode.
Okay.
Is I say to you, the good news is on suicide, 8 out of 10 people who are suicidal are ambivalent. On average, 9 out of 10 give hints in the last 7 days leading up to an attempt, which means the vast majority of people want to be saved. The vast majority of people can be saved. And you can do it by doing something as simple as what you and I are doing right now, and that is starting the conversation. If you know what to look and listen for, what to do and say, and how to find resources. So I think our next episode, Dave, we should cover should be your first lesson in what they call mental health first aid.
Okay.
Spotting the signs and symptoms and knowing what to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to do, and how to find resources. And that's what I teach. When I do the keynote, that's the part of the curriculum is. Because again, people obviously 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, they want to be saved. It's the most preventable cause of death on the planet. And anybody can stop a suicide. You do not have to be a clinician. You just have to care.
Well, I'll tell you that's very moving to me, because you can't help but listen to what you just said as my own, with the community that I have, the people that are in my sphere of influence, and realize that, with 400 people or whatever going to hear this podcast or more, hopefully more, that there's some percentage of those people that, we're realizing that. And like I said, I'm not an expert, but just acknowledging that and inviting them to a resolution that isn't suicide, to me is a very, very moving and powerful thing. Well, Frank, how do we stay in touch with you? Aside from the follow-on episode, I did one episode where I was talking to somebody that's kind of, it's hard to even think of them the same as she did Bitcoin, and I was talking to her, and I learned a lot in the discussion. I said, I really just toying with this. I don't know that much about, crypto. So I did an episode Crypto for Dummies, where I asked stupid questions. But and that was a special episode. So maybe we'll do a follow-on episode where we just drill down on this whole concept of mental health and what we can do as warriors to identify and serve those people in our audience. So I love that idea, and thank you for sharing that. How else do we stay in touch with you? Because we're going to be on the Be Connected platform, which I don't think you're part of, but we'll get you on there. And then I know you've got your YouTube channel, TEDx's, other things. So how do we stay in touch?
Well, and by the way, if you have 400 subscribers,
Hmm.
1 in 4 people has a mental health challenge. So chances are 100 of them.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. And there's also a chance, David, that somebody listening today who has chronic suicidal ideation just realized, oh my God, it has a name. TheMentalHealthComedian.com, or as we say down south where I was raised, TheMentalHealthComedian.com. And if you go there and you put an email address in, you can get a download of the first in our 4-book series on men's mental health. It's what I did was I created it for Audible, and then I had my editor create an MP3 that I can give away for free. So
Great.
put an email address in, you get it free, and I narrate it. I'm going to narrate them all. And so it's TheMentalHealthComedian.com. My email's there, phone number's there, all that nonsense.
All right. Well, that's brilliant, and I am so glad that we had a divine appointment, as I call them, that we got together. I realize you're the happy heathen, and I'm the Christian in the conversation, but that's okay, because you know what. I'm not asked to delineate anybody in that way. I love you. I may not like you, but I love you, and I have to do that because that's what I'm instructed to do, and I do. And I'm sure the audience is going to love you as well. All right. Well, we're going to land the plane here. Thank you, Frank.
My
Appreciate
pleasure.
it. It's been a great journey. I'm glad we were able to pull this off, and we'll be back next week. Thursday, the upcoming week at 11 a.m. Central or 9 a.m. Pacific for people in Frank's neck of the woods. And we'll be back with another episode of Warrior versus Zombie. And here are the final outtake. Oh, yeah. Frank, you got something.
Yes, and in the next episode, I'll tell you about the little town where my cruise agent lives, where they filmed 3 seasons of The Walking Dead. Speaking of
Oh,
zombies.
yeah, we did talk about that. Yeah, so the zombie thing will have more meaning to those who don't
Yep.
understand where the metaphor comes from. And there's a lot of application of those people's journey in that zombie apocalypse. And now with 2020, it's even more fascinating. Anyway, we could go on forever. Well, let's land the plane, and we definitely will be back, Frank. And thank you again for serving as you have here. I'm sure that we're going to make a difference in some lives here, and maybe we've saved a few from this episode. So
Yep.
thank you, Frank. I appreciate you, brother. Talk to you later.
See ya.
Have a good evening, everybody, or good afternoon, or whenever you're listening to this, and we'll be back next week.